Hello, everybody. Welcome into our November Global Sport Matters Live, a virtual panel show where we bring experts together to discuss issues that matter in the world of sport. My name is Brendan Kleen, the Digital Communications Specialist at the Global Sport Institute, filling in for our usual host, Events and Programs Manager Kendall Jones. Before we begin, we did just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the lands where the Global Sport Institute and Arizona State University sit belong to the Hohokam and Upper Pima people. Today's show is part of our newest digital issue from Global Sport Matters called Taking Charge in Women's Basketball. It includes written articles as well as podcasts and videos like this throughout the month. Inside of the issue are stories examining the ways in which Title IX affected women's college sports, the ways in which Black women coaches navigate the hierarchy of the NCAA, a closer look at mother coaches like Adia Barnes in the sport, a discussion of the role of men in building a pipeline for women in women's college basketball, and much more to come. Of course, the inspiration for our November issue and today's show is the newest field study from the Global Sport Institute research team on NCAA women's basketball hiring criteria and career pathways from 1984 to 2020. On the field study page, you can see the data come to life with charts and takeaways to inform your consumption of all of our content all month long. I did just want to remind all of our attendees, as well as those watching on LinkedIn, that our team will be sharing the link to the issue, these stories, and more, and we encourage all of you to use the Q&A feature on Zoom, as well as the comment section in LinkedIn, to join along in the conversation, ask any questions that come up as you are listening and watching, and participate yourself. Let's get on to the show. Today, we welcome Dr. Julie Rousseau, the Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Southern California, Dr. Amira Rose Davis, the Assistant Professor of History and African American Studies at Penn State University, Nikki Fargas, President of the Las Vegas Aces, Sharnia Johnson-Chapman, an alum here at ASU and a former member of the women's basketball program here, and Kyle Adams, the principal and chief strategist of It's Bigger Than the Ball, and of course, our host, Dr. Nicole Lavoie, the director of the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport at the University of Minnesota, who I would now like to turn the show over to.
Thank you so much, Brendan, and thank you to GSI for hosting this panel and bringing together a great group for what I know is going to be a fun conversation on a Friday morning, afternoon, maybe night, depending on where you're tuning in. So I thank you for tuning in and listening and hopefully learning from our panelists today. I've really been looking forward to this panel for since we got it on the books, and we have so much ground to cover in so little time for you to all share your insights. I do want to say that I would encourage everyone who's tuning in to go to the GSI website and download the field study. There is a lot of data in there, and I can speak from a researcher's perspective. That's a lot of data, 36 years of data around career trajectories and identities and pathways for coaches in women's college basketball. It's really exciting, especially as we lead up to the 50th anniversary of Title IX in 2022, and Minneapolis, Minnesota hosting the Women's Final Four next April. We're super excited about that. So the structure of what we're going to do today is we're going to start from the inside out, and I'll first ask all our panelists to talk about their sort of personal experiences with basketball. Then we'll go to more of the interpersonal, organizational, and then some of the societal factors that are influencing the game right now. And then we are going to end with some tangible solutions, and we're going to think big on what women's basketball looks like moving forward. So let's get started. It's game time. So here we go. We're going to start with a random warm-up question. So if you were going to wear one, I know this is going to be a tricky one athlete's basketball jersey for the rest of your life, just one, who would you pick and why? And so I'm going to start it off with Madam President. You get to go first. Nikki, take it away.
Well, that is a great question. I will tell you the first, and this goes to my competitive nature, the first jersey I thought about was my own. That as a competitor,
yes.
I'm wearing my own jersey. But I will mention this. One of the players who I when I went to Tennessee, I played there in the early 90s, and her name was Deidre Charles. She's since passed away. We called her Deidre Night Train Charles because everybody who watched the Lady Vols and watched Deidre play, you knew she was like a locomotive coming down the lane and you better get out of her way. But Deidre was a senior and I was this little rookie from a small town, Oak Ridge, and she was from Michigan. And the thing that I took from her that I would say, this is why I would wear her jersey, was because she made me feel like family. Immediately was there for a rookie, all of us, but she really invested in the people that she played with, that she competed with, that she loved on. And to this day, she is by far one of the greatest leaders that I have ever been privileged and honored to be a friend, a teammate of, and may she rest in peace and know that I love her dearly.
Thanks, Nikki. Dr. Davis, whose jersey do you wear and why?
Yeah, I totally was gonna be like my AAU jersey from a million years ago. I'll be a nerdy historian and I'll say Lucia Harris. Thinking of pioneers, I think about people who played and opened doors and pathways before we had, we still don't have enough products and jerseys to wear, but way before that was even a thing possible, I think. Bringing visibility to some of these historic grades would be where I went with that.
Great, thanks so much. And I will just note that all our panelists on here have amazingly long, accomplished bios. And I'm going to, as the moderator, say, let's not take our time reading their amazing bios. Let's hear from them. So if you want to Google them or go on the webpage, we've got a great group here. And as they talk today, I'm sure versions of their pathways and their identities will come to light. So thank you, Dr. Davis and Nikki, for leading us off. Dr. Rousseau, Dr. J, I'm going to call her because you're up.
Well, this is hard, first of all, but I'd have to say, and maybe it's because I'm at USC right now, but also I grew up in California. I'm a Southern California girl, and I would have to say Sheryl Miller. Sheryl was in my opinion, I think she was the best player of all time. Who really never got her just due. It was during a time where women's basketball was just coming of age in some ways, but again, didn't have even the platform that it has now. But Sheryl was at 6'2". She had guard skills, post skills. I mean, you talk about positionless basketball player who could do everything, as well as her charisma. And so I definitely would have to say Sheryl Miller would be the jersey, just because I want to amplify her legacy of how great of an athlete that she was.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. Coach Adams.
If there was one jersey that I could wear, I would say that it would be number 44 for Cheney State, Elon Delaney. Yolanda was an amazing basketball player during Coach Stringer's her run to the '82 championship game. She was actually an All-American in 1984. She was also a high school All-American out of University City High School in Philadelphia. Much like Sheryl Miller, inside out, and it was interesting as a young coach. I got an opportunity to work a basketball camp, John Chaney's basketball camp with her, and got an opportunity to get out there and play with her and see her post up, but also handle the basketball. And it's been really interesting watching her daughter have an opportunity to have a great career in the WNBA now. But I would say number 44, Cheney State, Elon Delaney.
Awesome. Thanks, Coach.
Thank you.
Trania, you're up. Whose jersey would you wear? You could pick your own or someone else's and why.
Ooh, this is hard. I would initially pick my own. Again, just competitiveness and just as a player, kind of taking pride in what you've done, what you've added to the game. But to pick someone else, kind of going a little bit against what everyone was going, I would actually pick Andre Spencer. Personally, for me, he impacted my life. I did play under him when I was little. He got me into basketball. Sorry, he passed away. So it's really personal. But yeah, he was just he was the first father figure to actually get me in line for basketball and to fully commit. So I would most definitely pick it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Well, as you can see, our panelists have been shaped in one way, shape, or form in and through basketball. And what I'd like to do is now have all the panelists share with each other if how your lives have been shaped by basketball, but if you could pick like a fork in the road, like there was that time in your life where you could go left or right. You're at the fork, and what was it? Which fork did you pick? And let's hear about that. So does anyone have a fork readily available that they could talk about at the top of their mind?
I had a fork in the road to decide my decision to get into coaching. When I graduated, I was like, I'm not coaching. After dealing with Pat Summitt, Mickey DeMoss, Holly Warlick, Carolyn Peck, I'm like, no, there's no way I'm going down this pathway. And so I think I fought it for several years. And then when my mid-20s, actually I was doing some broadcasting. And so I was on that other sideline. I was just watching, I was analyzing, and I was just talking basketball. And then I just realized I needed to do more. I think that was my fork when I need to be more impactful. I need to be more hands-on. I need to, be in a role model position for these young athletes, these young women. And that was my fork. And I remember going to Coach Summitt and telling her I want to get into coaching. And she said, well, I have a grad assistant position available and a director of basketball ops position. And I said, well, which one is going to give me more experience on the court to get ready to be a coach and learn more and be a sponge? And she said the grad assistant position would. I said, okay, so I'm going back to grad school. I'm like 27, 28 years old. And she said, by the way, it only pays like $600. So I ended up being a grad assistant, but that would be my fork in the road.
Interesting. And can I ask just a quick follow-up, Nikki? So having played under Pat Summitt and then immediately out of college, you're like, no way, I'm not doing that. I mean, we all know the legend of Pat Summitt. Why was your reaction that way?
I thought that coaches didn't have a life. I really felt like, I watched Pat, I watched Mickey, I watched Holly. I saw that they were just, up every morning through the night, the travel. And, back then you traveled commercial, you were commercial flights, you didn't have the same resources. And so it skewed my view. Now, had we probably had, and I could see Pat on private planes later, I could see her getting home on this, like going to recruiting after practice, go on the plane, get to that recruit's game, and then come back that night and still be ready to be with her family or take Tyler to school the next morning. I didn't see that because it was during that time in the 90s, that wasn't what women or women basketball, women's athletics, they weren't pouring those resources in there into coaches having that work-life balance. And it wasn't real popular either for women to be mothers and coaches. So that's a whole nother story that we can talk about.
We're gonna get to that later, Nikki.
Yeah, that's a whole nother one, which you'll find a lot of us, a lot of players and a lot of former players who got into coaching. That's what you thought. You thought, I have to be on this grind. How do I balance having kids and things like that? And so time goes on and you're getting older and older and that clock is ticking. And so there's that dynamic of all of this too, with limited resources and not showing that you can't have that work-life balance.
Hmm. Well, I love that fork is that, you know, where you're resisting, I'm not gonna do it, but this is what I meant to do. And so I'm going to do that despite myself. And it's led you to be a leader in the game. So thank you. Anybody else have a fork they want to share?
Oh yeah, I have a fork. I guess my personal journey was I played basketball 1 year at UC Irvine. Came from Dorsey High School, LA kid, in Irvine, California, which is not very diverse, was my kind of first experience outside of my own community. And so it was a struggle for me. And this was during time you get a scholarship, it's 4 years, you have to be released. And I was unable to be released. And so I really, in essence, I dropped out of school. I dropped out of school and realized, okay, now what? Started working, but the pull and the tug to coming back to basketball in some capacity, I was able to do that as a high school coach. I started as a boys freshman and sophomore head coach and was the assistant coach for girls basketball at Washington Prep High School. And, you know, that really it allowed me to hone my skills at that level, at the high school level. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. You know, and to your point, Nikki, coaches still don't have a life. So even at that age where we're giving so much to our student athletes, you know, really using coaching as really the tool for teaching life skills. It was my ministry, it was everything that I wanted to do. But I tell you, when I got the bug to think beyond just the high school level, when you say representation and how important representation matters, one of my student athletes, All-American, Cherie Sampson, Keshana Ledette, they were being recruited by the great Marion Washington and Renee Brown. And Coach Washington from Kansas, an icon, at first I was like, why are you thinking about going to Kansas? And when I met Coach Washington at the visit, that gave me such inspiration to strive and really aspire to be a college head coach. And so because of that fork, it pushed me into coaching and away from playing the game. And that really was the impetus in terms of, you know, my coaching bug, and really wanted to continue to coach.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. Coach Adams, I'm feeling your fork is coming out.
It's interesting because I would say my fork started when I started coaching women's basketball. I had coached men's basketball for, say, 12 to 13 years. And I really feel like it was divine that I got an opportunity to go back to Cheney and coach, someplace that I had such a level of connection with, but also a great respect and seeing the banners in the stands as an undergrad, but also really seeing how the program had changed and really wanting to help rebuild it and give those young women an amazing experience. And it really provided me with, you know, Coach Russo talked about it being her ministry. That's really what I've felt women's basketball has been for me, because it's required me to stretch and learn in different ways to be better for the young women I coach. And in essence, it's helped me to grow as a man and recognizing how I need to help develop and empower young women in and towards leadership. So, and I've had an amazing journey with it. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Right. Well, I think we're glad you took that right fork, Coach Adams, so you can impact young women in the game. And I know that you're doing that. When we had our pre-panelist call, Coach Adams was actually in the gym and took the call and put on a virtual background and was going in and out of the virtual background coaching, and he'd come back in. So you could really feel his passion and his care for his team. I love that. So Amira or Sharnia, do you have any forks you want to share?
Yes, I have a fork. So it was actually the end of my freshman year at ASU, spring workouts to be exact. I think I made it through the first day. And I was presented with the option of, mind you, I gave myself this option, but quitting and going back home or staying the course, getting my degree, building a life. And so I went up, I talked to Meg Sanders first. She kind of put a lot of things in perspective for me, but I still didn't really see all of my options, I would say. So I talked to Charlie about it, and she was very open to me finding ways to motivate myself to stay. I had lost my motivation at that point, and I didn't see myself kind of staying and giving my all to something that I wasn't able to see an outcome for. So I kind of took, I want to say about 2 weeks to live like a normal college experience. I was talking to my family, getting my options of what I would do when I go back home. And I kind of just made a list, like the pros and cons. I'm going to go home, not really have much to do, not really have an education, can't really build a career. Or stay here, you know, give my all to something that I would have faith and trust would make me a better person, as well as set my life up for a better one than I would have had at home. And I decided to stay. So that would be my fork.
Oh. Yeah, and there's a nice article about that, a more fleshed out version of that story online if people want to read it. It was a great story about, you know, how the support of a coach and how sport can lead to life development, you know, social, psychological, academic, career, and all the things that we know sport can do. It's a really good reflection of that in your story, Sharnia. Dr. Davis.
Yeah, I would say my fork was actually kind of an exodus from the sport. I grew up living, breathing basketball. Whether it was like some of my earliest devastating sports memories is like watching UMass lose to Georgetown in the 90s, or, you know, we went to a lot of New England Blizzard games, shout out to the AVL. I like Reach for the Summit was like the thing I read like every day. And I trained with my godbrother's AU team that was coached by my older god sister. And it wasn't until I started playing for the school, not for the AU leagues, that I didn't have a language to articulate how I felt when our team that was predominantly Black was getting all the foul calls, right? And we'll talk, Coach Adams will certainly talk about fouls later. But for me, it was really devastating to feel like we couldn't play, whether it was because we were racialized and getting foul calls, or because I felt like you could breathe on somebody and get a foul if you were a woman, right? And it made me become disinterested in playing. And I pivoted, and by sophomore year in high school, I was still playing, but my heart wasn't in it. I was focusing more on soccer and track. And I took a step back from sports my first year in college, and I was like, maybe I'll walk on something, maybe I'll like figure out something. And I was at Temple in Dawn's last year as a coach there. And I was like, oh, I need a challenge. And then I got pregnant, and that was like really challenging, but it also made me reconsider my relationship to sport, right? And so now I found myself as a history major in a storied basketball city that has a long history of Black women, particularly in basketball. And then I started being able to find that language that I didn't have a few years earlier, to ask these questions about how fouls are called, right? Or the racial dynamics of the sport, or what happens when you have a baby, right? And it disrupts what you thought your dreams would be. And so that was how I found my way back into basketball, was through researching historically, working with contemporary athletes. And then I have to say, over the last few years, as my little cousin has played D1 basketball, like I started like eating and breathing SEC basketball again. And it brought that last component, that last emotional component right back. And so I think my crossroads was certainly an exodus from the sport, but also repositioning my relationship with it, because you never really leave basketball.
Well, so now we're starting to get into this, what the field study from GSI really does is it digs deeper into how identities influence not only experiences and trajectories in basketball, but people's lives. So I have some specific kind of questions for each of you around this, but a couple shocking stats to me, not maybe shocking, but impactful statistics in the report is that only 23% of incoming head coaches at HBCUs were white men, 23%. And they played and those men played college basketball. On the flip side, nearly 90% of incoming African-American women and 80% of African-American men head coaches in Power 5 programs played college basketball. So there's this really interesting intersection of gender, race, identities, where you play, is it HBCU or a predominantly white institution, a PWI. So maybe Amira, since you just had your mic on, I want to circle back to you first. So can you set the context a little bit more? You started to go there in terms of how intersectional identities influence the experience and trajectories of women in sport, maybe basketball in particular. And you mentioned the Black women coaches in the SEC as sort of a project you're working on. And if you don't know Dr. Davis, she's like one of the most sought after speakers in the country right now around race, gender, politics, history of sport. So what do you got for us?
Certainly, and I just want to clarify that statistic because it is alarming. And what it is that across D1 basketball, when we look at basketball coaches, Black women, nearly like high 90% have D1 playing experience, right? That's their pathway, relative to white men coaching women's basketball. In particularly, only 23% of them have played D1 college ball, right? And so that really maps on to reports that came out through ASU a few months ago on Black women athletic directors, which showed they had playing experience, coaching experience, and were the highest, they disproportionately had more PhDs than the rest of the field. And I think that those statistics really help frame these contexts, because what it points to is a disparity that we're familiar with in many areas. Like, we know this disparity of how many Black athletes are on the field versus what sidelines and front offices look like. And I think a lot of the conversation has centered around football or men's basketball, but in women's basketball, it's particularly jarring when you consider that Black women comprise nearly 50%, right, of these athletes and a very minuscule coaching pool. And I think one of the ways to kind of frame this and tee it up for further conversation is when we disaggregate that, it tells even more of a story. And so in the Power 5, when we think of the conferences with the most resources and the most sway and the most kind of muscle, you see white men and white women not only disproportionately dominating the coaching ranks, but also having the most turnover. They can get second chances, right? White women coaches had twice as many second D1 coaching opportunities than Black women, twice as many, right? And then if we are able to look at HBCUs, what we see there is that Black women have much more representation. And then that's where Black men actually find a footing as well, like Coach Adams here. And that is kind of nearly even numbers. And so it tells us that there are pathways and pipelines that are available at HBCUs, right? But we have to think about resource allocation. We have to think about what that means to have people, told that that is the pathway, and then kind of very narrow pathway in Power 5. But we also need to be able to have that conversation in a way that doesn't just prioritize creating a pipeline from HBCUs to the Power 5, but actually talk about the general landscape that we're talking about coaching opportunities coming through. Why do you need playing experience if you're a Black woman? Why do you need more degrees? Why do you need all of this to still not get second chances? And that goes to our understandings of leadership and power and what we think a coach looks like. And so that is one of the ways to think about the framing of those statistics that we start off with.
Right. Dr. Rousseau, do you want to respond to that? Build on that?
Yeah, first of all, the statistics are staggering, right? When we think about it. And even, there was a report, I think in 2018, that Black women are 6 times more likely to be fired, forced to resign without second opportunities, more than any other group, and Black men being 3 times more likely. And so, for me personally, being a head coach, being at Pepperdine, not having my contract renewed, the question I had to ask myself was, now what, right? So much of our identity, I kind of talked about this earlier, my identity as being a coach for all the years, over 20 something years of being a head coach. The question is, now what? Now what? And so I really went through, again, that kind of transition, that phase of rediscovering, defining and redefining who I am outside of this realm as coach. One that I knew starting from being an athlete, moving into the coaching ranks, and knowing that there's lack of opportunity there. And so it really did kind of force me in some ways to say, okay, now what do I want to do? And I went into broadcasting for a year, went back to coaching, felt like I'm not growing. And so being at ASU and being there when Charnay was there, in terms of a grad assistant, been a head coach at every level, grad assistant, getting my PhD, which I love the fact that I was around women's basketball, but it was purposeful because I had to realize, okay, I need this degree, to your point, Dr. Davis, in order to make some more inroads for myself, right? And so my focus was on stress, the influence of gender, race, and intersectionality on stress in Division I head basketball coaches. And so really that was in many ways cathartic for me, therapeutic for me to first of all understand this intersectional lens, who I was as this Black woman in that space as being head coach. And to your point, I didn't have language to really understand what I was going through until I went through this, cathartic kind of exercise, dissertation, PhD, to understand that women, and when we look at the lens of stressors for women versus men, all said, I'm stressed because, I don't get to spend a lot of time with my family. But then when you use that intersectional lens, right, to really analyze that data, well, men were saying, I really miss time with my family and my wife does an amazing job of taking care of the household. Women were saying, I really miss time with my family. I've got to go home and work the second shift. And so we've got to look at those dynamics in terms of, why women aren't able to stay in these positions, or what support is the environment, the athletic department giving in order to help support the unique needs that women may have. And so I think when we begin to investigate that and support them, not just in, blanketed resources, but meaningful resources that are going to really make a difference. One coach said that her AD or president, I think, who was a woman, said, in your contract, we're going to put that if you need to take a nanny with you to when you travel, we will pay for it. We will pay for an extra ticket. So that's meaningful, I think, ways in which we can really address some of the disparities that we know exist in the athletic environment.
Thank you. Nikki, as a former basketball coach, moving from a Power 5 school to Power 5 and being a mother, Can you speak to what Mira and Julie were talking about in terms of your own experiences? And did you feel you had a second shift? Did you feel you encountered what we call the mommy penalty? Is that as soon as you have a child, you're immediately perceived as less committed and less competent? Can you talk to us about your experiences?
Yeah, and I will say this, being a mom is one of the greatest gifts that any woman could imagine. And so many of us have been moms. You know, when you go into coaching, you wear the hat of a mom, and you're wearing the hat of a mom to someone else's kid who comes to you, you know, 18, 19, and still need that guidance. I will say this, I was a mom at late in my time. I was 39 years old when I had Justice. And I will also say this, Justice came during right after the SEC tournament. We were playing in the SEC championship game. And I was so like, no, I'm going, I know, you know, I'm in that 4-week window. I just was like, I can't miss being with my team. I can't miss doing this. I can't miss doing that, to the extent of 48 hours later, I have Justice. So there's this, you feel there's a weight that you carry, right? Especially when I took the path of being part of a predominantly white institution, coached there, played there, because you have to be, it used to be twice as good. You got to be 4 times, 5 times as good now. And so there's a weight that you carry, because if you don't make it, that door may not open for the next woman of color or Black woman to come through that door. And so every little thing that you do, you have to be buttoned up. You have to be able to do a little bit of everything and then some. And so what I found was I was starting to stretch myself too thin. And I think we all can nod our head to that degree, but we also can handle that stretching. Like, we are people who come from a family where my grandmother only could receive an 8th grade education because the high school did not allow her to attend in my little small town. So I think we got to dig deeper into the lack of adequate primary and secondary schools. We got to look at, you know, what is causing this exploitation of the Black athlete, who then can't even get a job. Like, that just, when we really dive into it, like, you know, and coming from LSU, you know, I look on that field and it's heavily populated with my nephew, my cousin, my uncle's kids, my people's. But then you look at the whole body of the student athlete, and we're only put into football, track and field, and basketball. Why is that? Because these opportunities to go play golf, to go play tennis, we couldn't afford to do that, or we weren't allowed to go do that. But the football, this is coming from Power 5, is the cash cow. It is driving this business. But we can't, but what we're missing is that we are not trickling that down, that those players, those Black athletes, those football players, those men's basketball players, they are carrying a lot of other sports, but we aren't in those sports. So I think we've got to also examine that there's got to be a trickling down effect where my daughter, you know, Kyle's kids, your son, what, Mason is your son. They need to be able to do those same things that the next student athlete is able to explore at a younger age. We have to break this cycle. We have to get more involved in this historical suppression on our people and allow those opportunities to happen at a younger age.
Thank you, Nikki. Coach Adams, I see you nodding there. You want to jump in? Please do.
Coach Fargas, she brought a sharp knife today. I appreciate you acknowledging Mason. a few things. I think to Coach Fargas's point, when you look at the athletic ecosystem, you see so much of people of color. And I think you have to start to think about who we are as coaches and what it is we really give to these student athletes, right? And what are we, we go and we ask these young people to come and play for us at these institutions, but we really have no level of true commitment or engagement with the communities that they come from. And if this doesn't work out, you go back to that community and your life is what it is. And one of the things that I think we've seen over the last year is we've seen some coaches start to talk about different things that are going on in communities. I look back to the 1994 BCA call with Charlie Rose and John Thompson, John Chaney, and those coaches recognizing that they have to have a level of responsibility to the communities that their kids come from. And I think that that's vital for us as coaches, not just Black coaches, right? I think coaches at all institutions and at all different levels, you can't in good conscience ask a child to come play for you, to suit up, to bleed for you, and you have no level of understanding or commitment about what's going on in their community. And not to become political, some don't even, there's a whole nother political perspective that a lot of these coaches have based on the people and the communities that their players are coming from, that I don't think that we talk a great deal enough about. But to Coach Fargas's point, that has to come with educating the parents at the younger levels and the student athletes at the younger levels. Why do you want to go to this school? It can't be just because the gym is amazing or they're on TV. Is this a person who can be is this coach a transformative figure who will be involved in your life for not just this 4, but for the next 40? And I think those are the type of questions that we've got to start asking in the recruiting process as parents and as coaches.
Yeah, Dr. Rousseau, do you want to talk a little bit about the program that you're involved with, the chair of the new Black Lives Matter action team at USC, and how that might be helping address some of what Coach Adams is talking about and addressing the concerns and the experiences of Black athletes and coaches and staff at a predominantly white institution?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, education all day, every day. I definitely think that is really the vehicle that we need in order to keep moving forward. So last year, 2020, as we all know, the world witnessed the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many of our athletes professionally in particular began using their platforms to really speak about the injustices that they were seeing. And it's very similar. We have a historian here in terms of some of our other former Black athletes using their platform as well, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Muhammad Ali, so forth, so on. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that at our institution, USC, we had several Black student athletes and allies create the United Black Student Athletes Association. And they presented 12 recommendations to our athletic director, Mike Bone, and said, this is what we want our experience to look like. And to Dr. Davis's point, they were well organized, it was well thought out. Some of the recommendations simply state that Black Lives Matter. The other was that there be a more comprehensive hiring process of Black, BIPOC staff members in specific areas, specifically in sports psychology, athletic medicine, and really having people in those spaces who could identify with the Black experience. And so from that, after those 12 recommendations, again, it's many more, but Mike Bone, our AD, created the Black Lives Matter action team. And I'm an adjunct professor at USC as well in gender and sexuality studies. And so I had been working with female student athletes of color in a class, identity development, and I became chair of the action team. And last year, we did a 10-month dive into kind of a needs and asset assessment of what is going on in USC athletics. How can we address and put action behind these 12 recommendations? So we had a steering committee with all of our executive team members. We met weekly for, again, pretty much a whole year. We also had an advisory committee of 30 people, which included student athletes, coaches, support staff, professors, and faculty members on campus, and took each one of the 12 recommendations and tried to put policy and action behind them. For instance, one recommendation was that there be no athletic activity on election day. Well, we went with the LeBron James model, more than a vote. We created a voting center at the Galen Center. And so those are the ways I think that we've tried to tackle some of those concerns from our Black student athletes. And, really taking them and being able to tangibly put into action some policy changes in terms of hiring practices, that there be, even from the onset of the description of your job, that it should be inclusive and show that we are a space where we're really embracing the DEI and belonging space. But more importantly, what also happened was not just at our institution, but at the Pac-12 level, the conference level, our Black student athletes in the SALT program and leadership program said that they voted on mandating that every Pac-12 institution has a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer on its campuses, so that they could then continue that work that started in 2020. And that's the reason why I'm in my position as a DEI Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And so I think those are tangible ways of educating, creating change, creating opportunities. I'll say this last thing. I know I'm probably beyond my 2-minute limit, but one of the other recommendations is that there be in-person implicit bias training. We have started that training this year, where we are not just doing it as a general department, but we're going team by team, division by division within the athletic department, having these implicit bias conversations, and then moving on to other topics, making sure that within our department, we're changing the climate and culture through education and making sure everyone has the same kind of knowledge that we're building on.
Dr. Russo, I think your phone's going to be ringing off the hook. Come do that at my institution, please. Thank you. Sheryl, what were your experiences as a recent college student athlete around some of the things that the other panelists are talking about that you can speak to?
I would probably say the inequality with women in sports as compared to our counterparts, the males. Specifically my years, I remember in the beginning, it was more so the men would receive more resources than we were, or we would receive the resources after the fact that the men got them, just specifically because they got them. I would also say this was past my years, but with the NCAA tournament and the weight room incident, it was clear as day. They have a full maxed out weight room. They can get what they need done. And the women had little dumbbells with yoga mats. So just the dynamic of the support that men receive and the attention they get and the media that they get promoted compared to women, I would say it really impacts the players, honestly. As much as we try to focus on our game and the purpose of the game and, trying to win, staying together as a team, we also do notice if the men play before us, crowd full of people, here comes our game. It's kind of like, okay, now we're gone. The men left, we're going to leave. So just kind of, I would say more exposure, and as they talked about, more education on the basketball side for women, I think that would lead to more support.
Great, thank you. And before we sort of move on to segment 2 here, Coach Adams, I want to circle back because Amira talked a little bit about this, but you did a study, or of some research around this foul calling in the HBCU athletes or Black athletes versus white athletes. Can you speak a little bit more to that for people that are unfamiliar with this phenomena?
Sure. And I did not conduct the research, but I wrote a piece about the research. It's called That's Foul. It's on my website. But in 2018, Andrew Dix of Middle Tennessee State University conducted a study that found that HBCU women's basketball players are called for significantly more fouls than their PWI counterparts. And that was very interesting to me, in that during my time coaching at Cheyney and also as a student at Cheyney, Cheyney, for those who may not know, was a member of the Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference. It was the only HBCU in the conference. So as a student, I would see this disparity against of how fouls were called. And then when I came back to coach there, you know, I saw it and experienced it. But what really concerned me was the experience that our kids were having because of these disparities. And I recall my first year as head coach at Cheyney, there was a timeout. We were playing Shippensburg. One of our seniors comes over to the bench during the timeout. She's crying, walking to the bench. I said, "Faye, what's wrong?" She said, "Coach Adams, they're cheating. They're cheating. They just told them, don't worry about it. We got them. We're going to take care of it." And seeing these instances act out over numerous years. And then when I transitioned to the Division I level, when you have the guarantee games, you really start to see how the officiating again is biased. But I think it's really interesting when you talk about the stressors on coaches. You know, a coach at an HBCU may have to play four guarantee games, right, to help fund their athletic department, and how that demoralizes the impact that can have on those young women. And then those coaches, you know, God bless them, you know, they've been able to lift them back up, to get them reinvested and prepare them for conference play. But I think Dr. Dix's his research is really important, because we don't think about how these experiences impact our ladies as they move forward and get done playing, right? When they go out into the work world, and how they view themselves and the things that they can achieve and accomplish. So I ask everyone to please go out and take a look at this research. The name of the research is called And One. It's in the Howard Journal of Communications.
Right. Thanks. I think our team behind the scenes will make sure to drop that in the chat for everybody. That's a really good resource. So, oh gosh, I have like so many different directions I want to go. So we've all sort of been talking about, we're sort of talking around, but about growing and developing women's leadership in sport, specifically women of color's leadership in sport. Nikki, I know you have some thoughts on this. Perhaps you want to start us off. What are kind of like maybe two tangible things that we can do to grow women's leadership in sport?
First, we got to examine, you know, who's making the decision. I think it starts at the top. And, you know, coming from the SEC, where, you know, we had 7 Black head coaches, you have a conference that has 0. Now that is amazing to have.
Do you want to call out that conference?
Oh, the Big 12.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm about to do it for you.
The Big 12. You know, it's like, and I'm just saying this because I'm at this point in my life, right? I'm going to be 50. Julie, I know we look good for our age. So
we do, but I'm well beyond 50. But
that's why I said you look good for your age. I'm not trying to tell anybody your age.
I appreciate you.
Be careful of women over 50. We have things to say. We're not taking
Absolutely,
anybody's crap
we're
anymore.
not. We are not.
So one, I would look to that. Who is doing the hiring, and are there really, like, you can have somebody in place, but is there a check and balance? Is there accountability in place? Because I think to me, there's got to be an accountability component. Like, if you're responsible for the lives of, all of these young student athletes, you have to carry that responsibility. And with that great responsibility comes an accountability. And so when you're failing in that area, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or equal pay for women doing the same job, you should be held accountable for that. Just like as a coach, we're held accountable for graduating our students, making sure that they perform on the court or on the field. There's an accountability there. And so I would say, look at the leadership, those who are making the decision, not the suggestion, those who really make the decision, and then the accountability, and is that in place?
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is at the Tucker Center, we have a report card, a Women in College Coaching report card, that's really a complement to the work that GSI is doing and Dr. Lapchick and his team at the Tides Institute. And we collected data on race and gender for head coaches of college sport this past year. And what we found is the schools that got A's, and an A is 70% or above, or your head coaches are women, okay? There was only 20 out of 340 schools that got A's, and far more got F's. But what was interesting about those 20 is that half of them were women or men of color. Half. And we know that that is not reflective of the athletic director makeup in Division I college sports. So my point being is that the report card is an accountability mechanism to those doing the hiring, and the people that are doing it well are women and people of color, and that diversity begets diversity, and there's something there. So thank you for bringing that up. Amira.
Yeah, I think it's important to underscore that it's not about a lack of talent or personnel. It's about a lack of opportunities, an opportunity gap, not an achievement one that we're talking about here. And this is where I like to sprinkle historical context, because I feel like it's really helpful to understand that before Title IX, when we're talking about coaches of women's sports, we're talking about 90 to 95% of women collegiate sport coaches of women's team being women. Right, that number is now under 50% today. These are the unintended consequences, right, of Title IX. And this is why we have to have nuanced and critical views. Don't be afraid of the mess, jump in it and understand, right? Title IX can simultaneously have opened up doors and opportunities. But as Nikki said earlier, right, the fastest growing sports under Title IX are also the least diverse. I'll say that again, the fastest growing sports under Title IX are also the least diverse, right? And so there's a way in which the system and the institutions that we're operating within, it requires us to think big and think about those decision makers, because everything else is like playing with the tip of the iceberg and you're never actually moving it, right? Because the other thing to consider with it is, we talked about the number of SEC coaches last season was 7. To be clear, there was 6 across the rest of the Power 5 schools, right? That number is now 5, right? 3 departures, 1, that's the math that is hidden. It's very easy to be like, okay, they're still leading. They are. But we need to talk about retention, right? We need to talk about how finicky coaching positions are, because it's very easy for that math to go backwards, right? It's very easy to become a replacement instead of an additive equation. And I think the last thing that, I think about in terms of this kind of conversation is also to connect it to Sharnee's point about inequity, is Title IX, is not applied to the NCAA as an institution, right? There was a whole court case about that in the 90s. Despite their member institutions needing to abide by it, they do not have to. But it's helpful to understand and remember the history that there were other moments of possibilities. There were robust sporting histories before this. When you were talking about all the sports, I always start an assignment with my students talking about Tuskegee in the 1920s, who had just installed 10 tennis courts, half of them with lights so you could do night games, a golf course, a swimming pool, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So a lot of times understanding that there is a precedent for widespread sporting opportunities. There was a precedent for robust leadership positions of Black women in sports. But there was actually a process of running people out of the game, out of those positions. And so if we look at the moment in which the NCAA takes governorship over women's sports, we can actually see those possibilities being stamped out, right? Where other voices in the room were pushed to the sidelines. And an organization that sued multiple times to not have to do anything about women's sports suddenly is in charge of it. So we shouldn't be surprised about weight rooms, right? And this report I mentioned that just came out about gender inequity is not necessarily new, but it has a lot of receipts. And I think it's really helpful to understand that this is also about investment. This is the last point I make, but it's a really important one, so I have to say it, because you can't push for the same product, right, without an understanding. There was $35 million more invested in the men's postseason tournament. $35 million more. And when we're talking about inequity, we're not just talking about weight rooms. We're talking about access to higher quality COVID tests in the middle of a damn pandemic. Despite the fact that San Antonio, now I'm mad, despite the fact that San Antonio built a PCR testing center 2 miles from where the women were housed, they still had antigen tests, which resulted in like 5 times as many false positives that were taking people out of games, right? We're talking about corporate sponsors, food. Men had higher access to better quality food, not just because they had it catered, which was also true, but because they authorized their corporate sponsors, Pizza Hut, Buffalo Wild Wings, to provide meals. You can just do that too for women. Like it's just that simple, right? And so sometimes it's just like simple decisions. And you talk Coach Adams about like what that does to the psyche. Players know it's just a continuous process of reminding people that they are not deemed worthy enough for investment. And this is why I get mad. It's irritating, right? It's very irritating.
That goes back to the accountability. You know, like who said that was okay? Somebody looked at what they were going to do for the women, and someone said, okay. And then you got to also look at, there's a budget that's set, right? The money that's invested, there's a budget, and the budget for women's basketball at every level is far less than men, probably 4 times. I don't know the number, but
I can tell you the number.
Yeah, I know you. Go ahead, Dr. Mara.
The last 2 years on the men's side, $4,285 were spent per college athlete in the men's postseason tournament March Madness. On the women's side, it was $2,588. So $1,697 difference in spending just per athlete.
So you're seeing there's a lack of investment. Now, if I think that you're important and I think that I value you, then I'm going to invest in you. But so when you don't have someone in that leadership role that feels that way every day they wake up, then there needs to be some type of system in place that puts that person in that decision-making role in check. So you might not feel like women should have this or women should get that. That might be your own personal feeling, and then you shouldn't even be over women's basketball or part of the decision-making process in the beginning. But if you are, there needs to be a accountability for you to allow that to happen for women in 2021. That's pretty sad. I do want to add this, Amira, because I know there's a lot of talk about the change. Like when I came through, there was a lot of women coaches, white women coaches. That was it. Carolyn Peck was the first assistant coach at the University of Tennessee that I ever had in my entire life, besides my mom. So if your mom isn't involved, I didn't see one in elementary coaching me or high school coaching me. And finally I got to college and I was like, whoa. But this is where, love men coaching women, but until women can cross over into the men's game, you have got to have some protection for our opportunity and our access. And that's where we're seeing this huge gap, like where you're getting an influx because the salaries are a little bit more attractive and more people are coming into coaching. But until we're able to move our pool into another one, ours is really small. Our opportunities are really small, and we still have to guard those until we're able to coach on the men's side.
And ironically, those opportunities are not opening up in the college space, but a little
Right.
bit in the pros, which is
The NBA.
very ironic, I think. Sharnia, as an athlete, what do you make of this? I know in our pre-call, I asked you, you ever want to go into coaching? And you're like, oh no. So, but now you're sort of revisiting that, much like Nikki. So what do we need to know from you to help channel more women into sport leadership and sport coaching positions?
I would say it's bigger than just me. So me personally, I'm very motivated by giving myself to other people. In college conditioning, when I thought about me, I'm gonna die, I don't want to do this, never made my times. But when my team's like, come on, we have to do repeats, we need you at practice, we need this, we need that, it's easier for me to push myself and give my all. And I feel like that's a big part of me changing my decision of not wanting to work with kids or work to be a coach and give back. As we said on the call, I recently started communicating with a young man who's like, you can give back. You have the blueprint to making it to one of the highest levels. Now help someone else. And so I think just kind of seeing how it's bigger than you, you might not think you have something to offer, but in terms you do. I never thought that I would be a coach. I never thought that I would be able to explain like a drill or how to do something to someone, yet I'm in practice with the ASU team telling the girls, hey, step out on this side, it'll be easier. And they're like, oh yeah. So it's just like, whenever you kind of step outside of yourself and give yourself to someone else, you never know how you're helping them.
Yeah, and I know all the panelists are doing just that. Coach Adams, can you speak a little bit to that about your passion for development of leadership of young women, and how do we get more of those young women that you're coaching into sport leadership positions? Not necessarily coaching, but just sport in general.
Well, I think first and foremost, for men who are in these positions, the ultimate goal should be, I should be grooming someone to take my position. And I know that that's not a popular thing to say, but the experience that young women have with us as men should equip them to feel that they can come and take this, but also the experience that they have through your advocacy for them. And I think one of the things that needs to be said is there needs to be more men speaking up in the face of other men about a lot of the disparities that are going on.
Wait, can we give a little clap to that? Yes. Thank you.
No, I recognize that I'm a visitor in this game. And, every day I'm thankful for the opportunity to be in it and to lift the young women that I work with. I've had an opportunity. I actually recently just hired one of our former players for Cheney as my assistant coach at the Shipley School. And I'm very excited to have an opportunity to help young women get into coaching. But I recognize that the experience that they have with us as a coach has a lot to do with that. If they have negative experiences as coaches, and then, you juxtapose that to what young people see they see coaches go through, right? The different challenges that they face, as Sharnia talked about, people don't want to deal with that. But I think when we look at what we do as not just coaching a sport, but really having an opportunity to influence and really be change agents. I tell people all the time, I came up in an era where I watched John Chaney, Vivian Stringer, Pat Summitt, John Thompson. I watched coaches who were not, they were great at their craft, but they were not scared to utilize their influence to impact what was going on in communities. And I feel that we need coaches that want to step out there and do the same. I think we get really, everything is about coaches getting a job. And we kind of sometimes lose, our connection to what our true ministry should be about. And it should be lifting communities and helping.
Mm-hmm. So how do we, and this, I'll just throw this out to the group. What are some specific strategies other than having Dr. Rousseau travel around the country doing in-person implicit bias training? How do we create change? What are some tangible strategic things that we can do to get more men on board, to push the needle, to change the system that we can sort of think about as we wrap up this panel?
Well, I say that there's a lot of people really doing great work. Black Coaches Association, the Women of Color Coaching Association. There's a breakthrough summit happening, what is it, 1 week, 2 weeks? I don't know what time is anymore, but that is from We Coach, right? That is an organization that's committed to doing this work and has a specific tenet that creates mentorship opportunities for coaches of color. Targeting where a lot of Black women especially get stuck at the SWA position, right? Because it's easy to be stereotyped as like, you're a woman, so you're nurturing and you're doing this and you're doing that, but it becomes a dead end, right? And thinking about, there's already organizations and people. So sometimes it's not a matter of recreating a wheel, but investing what's already kind of churning. And I think that when we're thinking of investment, as an individual, you have a capacity to demand little things like, can I get this game on my cable package? Can I see this reported, right? What the score was? Can I get a narrative about it? You can write in to do that. You can do something as simple as disrupting the hateful Twitter comments, right? That set this environment. You talk about disruption, Coach Adams, it set this idea, right? That it's women's basketball is something to be mocked, right? Something that is always the butt of the joke. Even just being like, that's not funny, right? That's old. A sandwich joke, okay, heard it, And those are like little individual things, but I think on a structural level, when we're talking about investment, it's important to understand that even well-meaning people in these systems can continue to not invest in women's sports because it's not incentivized. The men's tournament, right, makes money for the schools. There's literally an incentive to invest in your team. So the further they go, the bigger the check your school gets. There's no comparable thing like that on the women's side at the D2, 3 level or in HBC tournaments. And so thinking about how something like that needs to be disrupted, because it means that even well-meaning people who get through these pipelines and get in there are going to be in positions that require them to invest singly and not spread the wealth. And lastly, you can't be what you can't see. And so telling stories of folks in leadership positions who have been there, who are doing the work now and who continue to be there, uplifting those voices, centering those voices and disputing kind of tired narratives does the work, because you never know who's watching and you never know who now has a blueprint, right, to shake up the game in their own way.
Yeah. So Nikki, speaking of someone who's disrupting the narrative, right? Madam President, first Black woman, WNBA president, you were a leader in the college sports space and you're a founding member of the advancement of Blacks in sports. So what strategies can you bring? You have so much insight on this because you have made it and you're paving the way. You're that Dawn Staley who's sending out pieces of her net all over to the other Black women coaches in college basketball. You've got the net now. So how do we, what strategies can you offer?
I think Dr. Mira hit on the head. They will be what they see. So we have to be bold. We have to be present even when it's uncomfortable for us to be present. We have to stand in those rooms and we have to stand on those Zoom calls, and we might be the only face of color on those calls. So I think there's a level of commitment, and everybody has their own bandwidth. And so mine is very long. You know, I chair the WOC, the Women of Color Network, and we are comprised of over 60 Black women who are head coaches. We also have former head coaches that's part of the WOC. But what the WOC provide is what Marion didn't have, or C. Viv didn't have. It's a genuine trusting network where we collaborate, we mentor each other, we advocate for each other. We're doing everything to support one another, to the extent of navigating through COVID, driving ticket sales, getting fans in the building. Like we're here to lend that type of cohesion within a sport. I will be glad when we don't have to have a WOC. I'll be glad when we don't have to create, and Gary Charles created and he was the founder of the Advancement of Blacks in Sports. I'll be glad when we get away from that. But until then, I think it's all of our responsibility to join hands with those who are like-minded, like-spirited, who are ready to go toe to toe and don't apologize. Be you and be the best version of you. And if the person that you're encountering, whether it's your administrator, whether it's a player, I think for us, reaching back into the community, we have to start at a younger age. Like everything that I've learned later, I'm just trying to pour that into the grassroots, the younger generation, because I just saw what the college students did on our campus in creating the Black Student Athlete Association, in again another safe space where they can go, a place where they can really put in change. Like, hey, every student that attends this university, you need to go through some type of training of some sort, and so you're not sitting here making comments about somebody's hair, like little stuff like that. Like, you know, you don't just go and touch a Black woman's hair. I mean, like, but if no one's ever told you or taught you that, you wouldn't know. So there's a lot of things that we can do where we're at. But we all have to be willing, and everybody's got, and it's not just up to the Black community. It's up for all of us to be involved and making sure that the talk around the coffee break room, that talk needs to be on point, where we're not sitting here talking about, because again, that's very divisive behavior, no matter who you're talking about. So I think we have to make sure that wherever we are, that we are also holding the people around us accountable.
Yes. So any, Dr. Rousseau, you want to weigh in? We're sort of wrapping up here, a tangible strategy to share.
Yeah, I think Dr. Mira and Madam President hit all points very well. Just the one thing I would like to add is, you're right, we do need these safe spaces, creating that within our own community and communities. But the other thing is, like, again, my mind, it goes beyond, you know, goes to the systems, right? The systems that are in place, creating cultures and environments that, you know, are going to support BIPOC women and men that come into spaces where they are not members of the in-group, right? And so I don't think necessarily that always orders and edicts change systems, right? I think we've seen that throughout history, but I think what happens is, in order to change systems, you have to change people. And a part of that changing of people is changing the mindset, educating them, as you said, on, you know, don't touch my hair, any of the you know, the stereotypes, absolutely, the stereotypes that would that are negative towards any out-group members or marginalized people that are in that space. And so I still go back to, Nicole, I am not going around the country, but I do believe to have these implicit bias conversations. But I think if we're holding those decision makers accountable, right, for the decisions that they're making, we need to make sure that they're not just, signing a president's pledge or making sure that they are, abiding by some of the tiers and demands of Title IX, right, and being compliant, but that we know actually they're going through these educational sessions and being informed about exactly those things that our student athletes and our staff are saying that they're in need of. And so if we create this opportunity to educate and teach in order to inform how the decisions that we're making and make that be accountable, that they're accountable for going through these implicit bias trainings or education about what it means to be a Black person or a person of color in these spaces. Hopefully then those decision makers will begin to pause a little bit and reflect and maybe make some better decisions or more diverse decisions and equitable decisions that are more inclusive for the people that are in this space currently or those that we want to hire. And I will touch on this last thing, retention. It is not good enough for us to just hire and check the box. We have to create a culture that does send the message that this is where you belong. This is an inviting place. It's an inclusive place. And again, that goes through some of those educational opportunities that we need to provide to those decision makers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic that when we have, young people, student athletes within the system not that they're at the bottom, but from the ground up, pushing for change as they do, and they are. We have people in the system right now, like the coaches, the administrators that are also doing the work. What I'm hearing is what we're really missing is, people at the top down. And we've got Nikki, she's at the top, but she's N of one, right? So we need the leaders in sport from the top down to also, be part of the systems change. And there are some that are very passionate and doing great work, but there's not enough. So when we get all levels of that system coming together, that's, I think, where the real social change is happening and can be sustained. So I'm hopeful, and conversations like these really help push it forward. So what I want to end with here is let's do a little dreaming. We're thinking forward. 10 years from now, it'll be the 60th anniversary of Title IX, almost. Women's college basketball will have gone through a reckoning, right? The Kaplan report, all the things will have been put in place, and we're moving forward. There's more women presidents of WNBA teams. We've got more women. What does women's basketball look like to you? If you just shut your eyes and dream big, what would in 10 years from now you'd love to see happen? Let's have everybody just do a quick whip around and then we'll wrap it up. Who wants to start us off?
I can go and I'll throw it to Coach Adams, because one of the things you say, the 60th anniversary of Title IX was also one of the most destructive forces for women college ball at HBCUs, where there was a robust sporting history, the only place you could get a scholarship before Title IX if you wanted to play ball. And so my hope is that as we do this, a lot of our focus ends up being where the resources are. So we're talking about Power 5, but I hope that, when we're talking about the entire ecosystem of ball and opportunities and resources, that it is spread out and that we can invest in these programs that have these storied histories as well.
That's a great point. And Coach Adams was telling us that he got to interview a lot of the women that played for C. Vivian Stringer at Cheney, and what a cool project that is. So Coach, kicking it to you.
Well, Dr. Davis, I appreciate you saying that. We look at this year marks the 40th anniversary of Coach Stringer's team and their historic run to the 1982 Final Four and national championship game. But when I think about 10 years from now, I think women's basketball will be a microcosm of what's going on in our society. And I think that if we've got to end this narrative that the women's game is somewhat different than the men's game and that it has less value. You know, the women's game is a beautiful game. It is a beautiful game. And I think that the young ladies that play it, regardless of the institutions that they attend, be it HBCU or PWI, deserve to have an equitable experience. Because I think when we, not to go back, but when we talk about the differences in the experience that HBCU young ladies have and compared to PWIs, we start to say something about valuing another group experience compared to another. And I don't think that I would hope that that's not what we want to do. But I think a lot of the change in women's basketball will be a microcosm of what's going on in our society, that women have value and that men are not fearful of women coming into power. Because I think that, that's part of the issue that we're facing, is that there's somewhat of a fear of women, women of color coming into some level of power and being on the same, on the same platform and having the same opportunities. So I'm hoping that the ecosystem continues to expand in that way.
Thank you. What does it look like to the rest of you 10 years from now?
I hope 10 years from now, now I'm on the WNBA side, I hope that we can get a projected $1 billion TV viewership deal where that changed the whole landscape. Because as you look at the numbers of viewers for the WNBA playoffs, what they've done in the wobble to flip a Senate, what they've done in the social justice realm, how they've always been in the forefront of that fight. And to me, that would generate a different level of community engagement where the players now won't feel or have to feel restricted, like I have to go overseas because I'm not making the salary in the W that our counterpart are making in the NBA. So a lot of women are going overseas, missing birthdays, missing funerals, missing a lot of things with family. But if we can keep them here and we can keep them in market, then women love being part of the community. They will go and to I'm gonna go back to Dr. Mira's point, they will be what they see. We need to have the Asias and the Candace and the Sylvia, we need to have them in the community, being a face, a voice, and really telling their story in person. It's one thing for it to be told over a Zoom call or what have you, but to be in person. So when you meet an iconic figure, it motivates you as a kid. It says, I want to be just like her. So it keeps that kid on the path to keep them out of trouble, per se. But I think that's an area where it would have a trickling down effect if we could really look at the revenue that can be generated from, Turner or ESPN or CBS and putting and that being on the women's game. I remember when CBS covered the women's Final Four. That was it. There was no television revenue at all. And that's where I think there's this huge opportunity for us to even the playing field just a little bit. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but we got to see that type of growth as well.
And I was so sorry, but it's such a good point because we know it's there. We have like the numbers to prove that it's there, but it also requires us not to copy and paste what worked from the men's game. Like if somebody doesn't come with some lash glue sponsorships, like I don't understand how you watch Dejanay like play in March Madness with not a damn lash ever leaving her face and not say we need.
What about Tina Thompson? What about? So you got all these other people coming with their lipstick and what's the kid, the child name, the Kardashian kid, the one that has the lip, whatever. And I'm like, Tina Thompson owned the lipstick.
Yeah. And so we're seeing that with Glossier, like that partnership is the first beauty partnership with the W. Is not a copy and paste situation here. There are so many opportunities, but we have to actually rethink our understanding of what sports marketing is, who watches sports, who comes to games. It's getting a fuller understanding of the ecosystem allows us to really invest in some of these opportunities and get people sponsorships, get that revenue. And we know it because as soon as you make it easy to watch games, the numbers go up. Is the only damn thing that has gone up in the pandemic has been women's sports. So
absolutely. Yeah, it's not a cut and paste. It's a new model. So invest in women's sport. And when you do invest, not because it's the right thing, because it's a business imperative, it will pay off. And we're seeing that with the numbers. All right, what does basketball look for the rest of you that we haven't heard from yet? 10 years from now?
I would say, kind of to touch on what they were saying in terms of retention and just value, having the effectiveness of letting athletes know they are valued, that they are getting the resources that they can to go out and choose a career or a path that benefits them, not only as a person, but in their life. Personally, I know that I wasn't very educated on my options as a female basketball player besides overseas or coaching. So just having more resources, more education on the different ways that I can maintain a relationship with basketball in a way that would suit me better for what I love, what I like about the game, which is the relationships and the people that you meet and those relationships that you build.
Excellent. That's a great segue to Dr. Rousseau to talk. You haven't gone yet, have you, for your 10 year?
No, I haven't. I didn't go for my 10 yet.
There you go.
Well, again, I can't, I'm not going to repeat per se, but yeah, visibility, obviously, having more opportunities for women's basketball and women in general in sports, just to have a platform. Giving that visibility. And the other thing is just that leadership reflects the demographic of the players who play the game, right? In terms of those that are in these decision-making positions, that they begin to reflect that same kind of demographic that's playing the game, where you see Black women, women of color playing this game. They should also be transitioning into that leadership position. And to your point earlier, Dr. Davis, in terms of those who are, played the game, 90%, right, of Black men and women playing the game and then being coaches. There's this new model per se. And again, I know that this is a revenue generating sport, in terms of, men's basketball, women's basketball, hopefully moving more and more to that space. But just, again, making sure that we do, as women's players, basketball players, have a place to go outside of just the only thing of being a coach, but that you can be a part of, the decision-making, athletic director positions, in student services, whatever it may be, but really educating our student athletes while they're in college to take majors that will allow them to move into these positions even easier, because they're preparing for it while they're here with us. And so that whole kind of thriving while they're at the university, taking courses that are going to enable them to move into that next phase, and not just relying only on, being a coach, which is great, but really opening up the narrative that you can be more than a coach. You can be a decision maker, and that we do need to have more of our women in those spaces and having opportunities to take internships and do those things over the summer, during school, really creating opportunities for them to have those experiences throughout their 4 years.
Right. Well, if we can enact all those visions in the next 10 years, we'll be in really good shape. And perhaps we can reconvene in 10 years and see how we've done. But I want to pay attention to time. I know the panelists are all very busy people, as are the people listening on this webinar. So I just want to thank the panelists for their insights, their collegiality, their wisdom, their advice, and their time. I know I've learned a lot. I've got pages of notes down here. And thank you to GSI for having us all. Back to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Dr. Lavoie, and thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists. I know I will echo that I learned a ton, and I'm sure all of our guests today did as well. Panelists, you're free to continue on with your day. We just have a few more notes for everybody who attended. Please, again, do check out our Global Sport Matters digital issue, Taking Charge in Women's Basketball, at globalsportmatters.com. You can follow us across all social media at Global Sport MTRS. And if you're finding this on YouTube, or if you have not checked out our YouTube page, go over there to the Global Sport Matters YouTube channel, where you can find good stuff all month long as well. That closes us out for another GSM Live. We're taking a break for December, but we will be back in January talking all things sports gambling. So I hope you'll join us then. And everybody enjoy your weekend and enjoy the holidays.